Her chilling words, caught on a recorded jail call, weren't just a confession. They were a window into the mind of a woman whose descent into darkness shocked a quiet town and horrified a nation. From a volatile relationship to a gruesome murder, this is the true crime story of how Taylor Schabusiness turned a drug-fueled night into one of the most disturbing cases in recent memory. Green Bay, Wisconsin was the kind of town where life moved at a steady, peaceful rhythm. Neighbors knew one another, local shops thrived on regulars, and serious crime was a rare headline. So when police tape surrounded a modest home on Stony Brook Lane one cold February morning, the town collectively held its breath. Something terrible had happened. It all started when a woman living in the house went to her basement to look for a misplaced laundry basket. As she descended the stairs, a strong chemical smell hit her metallic, sharp, and wrong. She stepped further in and saw a bucket at the base of the steps. Peeking inside, she dropped it instantly and screamed. What she saw would haunt her forever, a severed human head resting among towels soaked in blood. At first, she believed it was a Halloween prop or some cruel joke. But the smell, the flies, and the chilling reality said otherwise. She called the police, her voice shaking, barely able to explain what she had found. When the first officers arrived, they secured the house and quickly confirmed the gruesome discovery. It wasn't a prank. It was a real murder scene. Within hours, detectives combed through the house, uncovering more body parts in various containers, some in bins, others in bags hidden under furniture. The horror seemed never-ending. The victim was soon identified as 24-year-old Shad, a local man with no known enemies. His body had been dismembered with shocking precision, and it was clear this wasn't an impulsive act. Someone had taken their time. Investigators were stunned not just by the brutality, but by the cold planning that had gone into hiding the remains. All signs pointed to one person, Taylor Schabusiness. She was the last person seen with Shad, and had a long history with him. Police found her within hours at another home, sitting calmly in the living room. Her arms were scratched, her clothing was soaked in blood, and she showed no interest in running or resisting arrest. It was as if she had been waiting. She was taken into custody and questioned. The officers expected denial or shock, but what they encountered instead was eerie calmness and bizarre rambling. The arrest made headlines instantly, but no one was prepared for the chilling details that would follow. For the residents of Green Bay, everything changed that day. The community that once felt immune to violence was now the center of one of the most disturbing murder cases in Wisconsin's recent history. News trucks lined the street. Reporters dug into Taylor's background. Everyone asked the same question. How could someone commit such a horrific act, and why? As the investigation deepened, the answers they would uncover were more shocking than anyone had imagined. Taylor Schabusiness had always been a troubled figure in her community. People remembered her as a bright child with a sharp mind, but that version of her had vanished over the years. Her teenage years were marked by a steady decline, run-ins with law enforcement, stints in juvenile detention, and repeated episodes of drug abuse. She bounced between homes, struggled to hold down work, and surrounded herself with chaos. Those who knew her weren't surprised that her life had taken a dark turn, but no one expected it to lead to murder. Her relationship with Shad was complex and unstable from the beginning. The two had known each other for a long time, first as casual friends, then as lovers. Their bond was fueled by drugs, late-night parties, and emotional turbulence. They would break up, then reconcile, only to spiral again into destructive behavior. Friends of Shad described the relationship as toxic, full of jealousy, manipulation, and volatility. But despite everything, he kept going back to her. In the weeks leading up to the murder, Taylor's behavior had grown more erratic. She frequently posted disturbing messages on social media, sometimes referencing death and darkness. She seemed to be unraveling mentally. According to records, she had stopped attending court-mandated counseling and had violated her parole terms multiple times. She was supposed to be wearing a GPS monitor due to prior charges, but it had either malfunctioned or been ignored altogether. The night of the murder, Taylor and Shad had been using drugs together, including methamphetamine and other unknown substances. Witnesses later said they had seen the two laughing and talking in public earlier that evening, giving no indication of what would come next. But once inside the house, things took a terrifying turn. Investigators believe that during a drug-fueled episode, Taylor strangled Shad with a metal chain. The act itself may have lasted several minutes, and once he was dead, she did not stop. What followed was a gruesome dismemberment. Using kitchen tools and possibly a small handsaw, Taylor separated Shad's body and began placing the parts in various containers around the house. Some were stored in plastic bags. Others were wrapped in towels. The head was placed in a bucket, later found by Shad's own mother. It was a level of horror that investigators said they had never seen in their careers.
Despite the shock of the crime, the investigation moved quickly. Physical evidence tied Taylor directly to the scene: blood on her clothes, DNA under her nails, and surveillance footage placing her near the home at the time of the murder. Toxicology reports showed high levels of drugs in her system, which only raised more questions about whether she had been in her right mind when the killing occurred. The community was stunned by the crime's brutality, but even more disturbed by how Taylor acted afterward. There was no sign of remorse, no attempt to flee, no effort to hide what she had done. It was as if she had embraced the violence completely, and for investigators, that was just the beginning of what they would uncover. Taylor Schabusiness didn't behave like most suspects in the aftermath of a brutal crime. As she sat in the police interrogation room, smeared with blood and showing no signs of panic, officers quickly realized this was no ordinary case. Her demeanor was unsettling. She wasn't crying or nervous. She wasn't asking for a lawyer. Instead, she appeared to be drifting between moments of lucidity and incoherent thoughts, offering strange, fragmented answers to questions. Investigators had seen shock before, but what they witnessed in Taylor was something colder, something detached. As detectives dug deeper into her past, a disturbing pattern began to emerge. Taylor had long struggled with drug addiction and mental instability. Her criminal record was extensive, with charges ranging from battery and disorderly conduct to drug possession and resisting arrest. But the most alarming details came from former acquaintances who painted a picture of someone obsessed with violence, control, and death. She often joked about killing and mutilation, sometimes saying things so dark that people assumed she was just trying to be edgy. But now, those jokes felt like warnings that had gone ignored. When Taylor was taken to jail, she made a phone call that would send shockwaves through the entire investigation. In the recorded conversation, her voice was calm and composed as she described the murder with chilling indifference. She admitted to strangling Shad with a chain and then, without hesitation, uttered the words that would go viral within days. "I cut his head off." The clip was short, but it spread like wildfire online, shocking even the most hardened true crime followers. It was the kind of confession that didn't just confirm guilt, it exposed a total absence of remorse. The prosecution now had more than just physical evidence. They had a direct admission from the killer herself, but that wasn't the end of it. Psychiatrists were brought in to assess Taylor's mental state. Some believed she was suffering from a psychotic break, possibly triggered by drug use. Others saw signs of deeper, more long-standing mental disorders. But even among professionals, there was disagreement. Was she insane or simply evil? That question would become the center of the courtroom drama to follow. Despite her rambling explanations, one thing became clear: Taylor was not trying to defend herself. She made no excuses. In fact, there were moments where she appeared proud of what she had done, even fascinated by the public attention she was receiving. Jail staff reported that she often smiled when her name appeared on the news or when reporters covered her case. She seemed to enjoy the infamy. Behind bars, Taylor Schabusiness had become more than a suspect. She was a spectacle. And as investigators continued piecing together her movements and motives, they realized this wasn't a random act of violence. It was a murder that had been building for a long time, hidden in plain sight, waiting to explode. The full truth, however, was still out there, buried in clues they hadn't yet uncovered. Weeks after the arrest, investigators obtained a warrant to search a storage unit rented under Taylor Schabusiness's name. It was a small, climate-controlled unit on the outskirts of Green Bay, one she had reportedly visited the day before the murder. What they found inside changed the course of the investigation. Among bags of old clothing, boxes of junk, and discarded drug paraphernalia, detectives discovered a small black box tucked beneath a blanket. Inside was a USB drive labeled with nothing but a red X. When the contents of the drive were opened, officers were stunned. The USB held hours of video footage, some of it filmed secretly inside the home where Shad was killed. Taylor had set up a hidden camera, angled to record the bedroom where they often spent time together. Most of the clips showed seemingly normal interactions, watching TV, doing drugs, talking in slurred voices. But in several disturbing videos, Taylor appeared to be speaking directly to the camera. In one clip, she looked straight into the lens and whispered about hurting Shad, describing how she had thought about killing him while he slept. She didn't name him outright, but the implications were unmistakable. The footage became critical evidence. Not only did it contradict her defense team's claims of a drug-fueled blackout, but it also suggested premeditation. Taylor had planned this, or at least fantasized about it for days, possibly longer. Prosecutors now had proof that her mental unraveling had a sinister trajectory. She wasn't just high and out of control. She had been spiraling toward violence with chilling clarity.
Additional files on the USB included macabre drawings and journal entries. In one document, Taylor wrote about death as a form of release. She described a need to control someone completely and talked about her fascination with dismemberment, calling it a way to feel powerful. There was no sign of remorse, only obsessive thoughts and fantasies brought to life through her own words and images. The videos and writings were presented during pre-trial hearings, leaving the courtroom in silence. Even Taylor's defense team seemed shaken by the revelations. The strategy to plead temporary insanity began to crumble under the weight of her own evidence. She had recorded her desires, documented her thoughts, and ultimately carried them out in horrifying detail. What made it even more disturbing was how normal she appeared in those recordings, smiling, laughing, behaving like anyone else until the moment the mask slipped. Public reaction was immediate and fierce. The media dubbed the case one of the most disturbing killings in Wisconsin's recent memory. Experts on criminal psychology weighed in, analyzing the footage and debating whether Taylor was a psychopath or suffering from extreme delusion. For the prosecution, however, it no longer mattered. The motive had been recorded, the planning had been exposed. And now, the trial loomed ahead, not just as a legal battle, but as a final attempt to understand how a young woman from a small town descended into one of the most shocking crimes in years. The courtroom was packed as Taylor Schabusiness stood trial for the murder and dismemberment of Shad. Family members, reporters, and curious onlookers filled every seat, their faces tight with tension. The mood was heavy, each day delivering darker details than the last. Taylor sat quietly at the defense table, showing little emotion as the prosecution laid out the evidence photos of the crime scene. The chilling footage from the hidden camera, and the now infamous jail call where she coldly admitted, "I cut his head off." The jury listened, visibly disturbed. The prosecutors presented a clear, brutal timeline. They described how Taylor had strangled Shad with a chain, dismembered his body using knives and kitchen tools, and scattered his remains around the house. The medical examiner testified to the method and force used, confirming that the killing had not been quick or painless. It was deliberate, slow, and savage. There was no room for ambiguity. Taylor's defense team tried to argue that she was suffering from severe mental illness and was incapable of understanding her actions due to the influence of drugs. They brought in psychologists who testified about her history of mental health issues and past trauma. One expert claimed she was in a psychotic state at the time of the murder, unaware of reality, consumed by delusions and hallucinations. They portrayed her as a lost soul spiraling into madness, not a cold-blooded killer. But the prosecution quickly dismantled those arguments. They pointed to the USB footage, the handwritten plans, and the strategic placement of body parts as signs of calculated behavior. Taylor's own words betrayed her before, during, and after the crime. Her composure during the jail call, her willingness to speak casually about the murder, and her lack of emotional response all suggested that she knew exactly what she had done. It wasn't insanity, they argued it was choice. When the verdict was finally read, the room fell silent. Guilty on all counts: first-degree intentional homicide, mutilating a corpse, and third-degree sexual assault. The judge sentenced Taylor Schabusiness to life in prison without the possibility of parole. There was no outburst, no tearful apology. Taylor stared straight ahead, unflinching as her fate was sealed. In the weeks that followed, the case continued to grip the public. Documentaries, podcasts, and news specials dissected every detail. Experts debated her mental state, social media lit up with outrage and horror, and her name became synonymous with one of the most gruesome crimes in recent history. In interviews from jail, Taylor remained calm, occasionally smirking when asked about her actions. To some, it was further proof of a deeply disturbed mind. To others, it was simply evil on display. For Shad family, the verdict brought closure, but not peace. The pain of losing him in such a horrific way would never fade. Green Bay had changed forever. A quiet town shaken to its core by one brutal act. And the woman at the center of it all, Taylor Schabusiness, would never walk free again.